I've always preferred expressing myself in writing rather than talking. That's where I sort of seem to be able to structure my ideas better and thrive. So I did my postgrad year at City University in London, and while I was there I got more interested in B2B, so business to business trade publication world. It's a combination of reading around the latest news in the market and getting out there and talking to people.
Do you have any personal convictions when it comes to the renewable energy space?
Wind farms have always attracted attention, positive and negative. Probably my journalistic instinct thought, well, that's probably a good sector to be writing about, but also it does feel good to be able to write about stuff that makes a contribution to trying to improve the world.
Talk to me about Tamarindo's vision, mission and values as a company.
At Tamarindo, our ethos is that we want to empower professionals in the renewable energy sector in a few different and overlapping but complementary ways.
As a journalist, where do you see the sector going moving forwards, particularly in the European offshore wind, as I know that's a speciality that you're particularly knowledgeable of? Before we get into today's conversation, if you've been enjoying seasons 1 and 2 of CleanTalk so far, make sure to hit the subscribe button. CleanTalk is working to bring you bigger and bigger voices from across the worlds of entrepreneurship, leadership, technology and engineering. But to continue doing that, we need to grow as a community. Thanks for all the support we've had on the journey so far, and let's continue to spread the word. Now on with today's episode. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Richard Heap from Tamarindo. Richard, thanks for joining me on the show.
Good to be here.
We like to start off with just getting to know the person in front of us. How did your career trajectory come about through your education? What did you study?
Well, at university I studied English, so I kind of always knew that I could do writing and wanted to do it. And so when I did my A-levels, I took 3 essay subjects. So, it seemed a natural choice. So went to study English at Southampton. And while I was there, I was writing the university music magazine for a few years as well. And then that sort of opened the door to postgraduate at City University in London, where I studied magazine journalism. So
the music magazine, did you have any ties with the music scene? Were you particularly interested in that, or was that just an expression for writing?
Yeah, I was. I guess I did the typical student thing of trying sort of a few different things when I got there. So I sort of did the writing a bit and tried the sort of uni music sort of radio station for a bit. But I've always preferred expressing myself in writing rather than talking. That's where I sort of seem to be able to structure my ideas better and thrive. So so sort of gravitated towards that, and then was out interviewing bands, watching gigs, all that sort of stuff.
That sort of route into the journalistic skill set, where did you build that up outside of uni? Did you do any sort of extracurricular activity or passion project, so to speak?
Not really, no. I was a bit late getting interested in it at school, so by the time I was coming to the end of that, then I kind of missed the boat to join the school newspaper. But then when I got to university, actually, they needed people to review albums and go to concerts and report on that. So kind of got stuck into it there, and I think some of the skills some of the skills I learned there have been kind of useful since.
What were you doing outside of uni? Did you have any hobbies or interests?
Playing video games, standard kind of stuff. At that time it would have been Grand Theft Auto. But when it made the initial leap from going from like a top-down map of the city into actually being something where you could have a character and run around in the world, which now seems completely accepted in the way that a lot of games are, but back then it was like, wow, sort of revolutionary stuff.
Was there any crossover between your interest in video games and writing?
When I was growing up, I would have read magazines about video games. If you were having trouble getting through a level or something, that was the internet of the day. I never really considered writing about games. I don't know. The industry seemed very small at that point, but also I think there's sometimes a benefit to keeping your hobbies slightly separate from what you do professionally as well, just to keep enjoying them.
What was your early career experience? Did you do any placements of any sort?
So I did my postgrad year at City University in London.
Yep.
And while I was there, I sort of got more interested in the B2B, so business to business trade publication world. So I think to get me onto that course, I think I did a 2-week placement at What Car magazine. No interest in cars, absolutely had nothing useful to contribute there, and was sort of pretty much a dead weight on their team as a grad for a a couple of weeks. That was before I got onto my course.
Okay.
But you kind of needed to have something to show that you'd had enough of an interest in a professional consumer publication to kind of to go out there. And then while I was at uni, I did some placements at various smallish trade magazines. So one was Housing Today, which was for sort of people working in the social housing sector, and then did a couple of placements at other magazines working with or writing for professionals, so working with young people and printing. So, a real mix.
Excellent.
After my course, then I got on to do a year's training scheme at a company called CMP Information, which was part of United Business Media. So that basically meant you go there for a year, and every 3 months you would move around different magazines. So I worked for 4 of them, working in sort of music, printing, and a couple in sort of construction, and one was in quantity surveying, which was very kind of niche. But I think what you learn from that, and what gives you a good grounding as a journalist or a writer, is then you start to know that you can go into these sectors and interview people and pick up enough knowledge to be able to start turning around your articles pretty quickly.
Talk me through your process for journalistic content creation.
It's a combination of kind of reading around the latest news in the market and what's happening, and then getting out there and talking to people. So, lining up your phone interviews or now video calls. The key is that, you're writing for an audience, so you have to find angles that are interesting for your readers. Mm-hmm. So, and it's often only by sort of getting out there and talking to people at the sharp end of what's happening in the industry that you get to hear what they're talking about and what hasn't been widely written about yet.
I did a bit of journalistic study while I was at college, and I remember just coming away from it thinking this was fantastic. I hadn't been in an environment before where the idea of going and starting conversations and learning had been fostered in such an organic way.
Yeah.
Did you find it to kind of open your mind a bit more in terms of opportunities for meeting new people?
When I started on my first main role at a magazine called Property Week, and I was there for 5 years, and I think the last 3 of them I was writing about sort of professional and legal services. So, so the people doing the very technical nitty gritty work in the industry. And I think actually going and talking to some of these people was interesting because, they could have very deep knowledge and know how this new regulation was going to have a massive impact on property owners. So people who own offices or warehouses or shopping centres or whatever it is. But they don't know that they're interesting. They kind of think that because it hasn't been written about, that people aren't interested in writing about it.
Sure.
Whereas actually, if you can go and get the information, sort of work out how it's interesting and relevant for readers, then you can then write interesting stories and present that in useful ways. And I think probably what's a good grounding for the B2B writing world particularly is, people are picking up these titles probably in their office. They want to get a quick snapshot of what's going in the industry, but they want to, in the main, like they're not interested in reading a Richard Heap article particularly. What they really want to know is how what they're reading is going to either help them in business, help them to make money, present them a risk that they need to know about, or there's a risk to them losing money. So actually having in mind that that's what people care about for this writing is, I think, an important principle, and it's one that still remains 20 years later after starting out.
How do you draw a line between eye-catching articles and overemphasizing or over-dramatizing things, and particularly in the B2B space? How does that? Because I can imagine that's a lot more contentious and serious to nail.
In terms of the B2B world, I mean, it tends to be quite self-contained. So, you need to build a reputation for actually giving people useful information.
Yeah.
And if, and I think getting people to click through on articles can be fairly hard won still. So, when they actually get through there, then you want to show that you know about the industry and you're saying useful, relevant things that are going to help them to broaden their understanding.
You talked about, the priority is to alert them of a risk or tell them of an opportunity or something along those lines.
Yeah.
When you're writing articles, what end of the process are you starting from? Are you thinking, I need to think about risks and I need to think about opportunities? Are you thinking about, this is something that's going on in the industry and I need to work forwards? Or do you think I need to work backwards?
Broadly, the balance of challenges and opportunities tends to work for most articles. I think, just the way that we as humans approach these topics, it can be more interesting to sort of focus on the challenge first, because that can be where the drama or the risk is.
Yeah.
But equally, some pieces lend themselves more to going in focusing on opportunities. For example, if you're writing about a new type of technology, like there was a story I was writing earlier about floating solar, for example. So, in that case, it may be going in and say, well, there's this project using this innovative technology, so here's what you need to know about it.
Yeah.
So, it's not always just focusing on challenges or taking the more negative angle.
Okay.
And just trying to be balanced, really.
How has the distribution of your content changed over the course of your career in terms of the mediums that it's consumed over?
When I was writing in London for Property Week and for the magazines I was training on, then they were all magazines with a website kind of bolted on. Whereas, the last 10 years since I've been writing A Word About Wind, that's always been a newsletter service primarily. And we have shared digital magazines, and we have, and still do sometimes do physical printouts of some publications if we're sharing them at live events or something.
Sure.
But I think primarily it's digital now, and it's more social media based.
What have the challenges been that have come along with that in terms of audience retention?
When I started a Word About Wind, then the newsletter was going out, and it was part of a membership package that would also include event tickets and other stuff. So I think, helping people to feel part of this community and seeing the editorial product as part of what they're getting, but not the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think that's been helpful. But then there's always questions about how much you keep behind a paywall as opposed to how much you put out there in the world, so people know that you have content that's worth engaging with. And it's and there's always a tricky balance there, and there may always be a tricky balance.
What's Tamarindo's approach been to that as a whole? Do you have any principles that are underlying the paywall approach? With
anything, you need to make sure that the business is sustainable as well. I mean, we're here to produce business information, and that has a value, and that should be reflected in the fact that it is a commercial product. Our principles are more around kind of ensuring that we know what's going on in the market and can advise our clients and readers accordingly. Because there are a few different things that Tamarindo does.
Yeah, let's dive into that. So explore the product range with me.
There's the media brands. So we've currently got A Word About Wind, an energy storage report, which news and analysis service, which kind of goes out as weekly emails each, and also with analysis pieces available on the website. Often we will write longer reports as well. So sometimes they can use our Tamarindo brand and be sponsored by other companies.
Sure.
So that's one thing. There's the editorial product side. There's also the events. So we run an annual conference that's called Financing Energy Transition.
Mm-hmm.
It's previously called Financing Wind, but the industry has, I think, moved on from just being, some people working in pure play wind projects. A lot of people are now looking more broadly at what they do in the sector. So we run conferences, we run an annual awards program, and we've also got something called a leadership council, which is a small group of people particularly focused on the Power-to-X and green hydrogen sector, which has been a lot talked about in the last few years, I think, since the pandemic. And the other big part of what we do is we offer PR and communication services to clients throughout the renewables and the clean tech industry. So I think all of that work is underpinned by the fact that we are experts in knowing about what's going on in the industry and help to advise people in useful ways. And if we're producing content for them or reports or whatever it is, then ensuring that it actually makes a contribution to industry debate rather than just being sort of another kind of anodyne report about, why green hydrogen is going to be great. Like someone may want to write a report about green hydrogen, but it's about trying to find what makes it different and stand out, because ultimately that's our job, and it helps the industry and it helps our clients if we can do that.
What would you say is that defining characteristic or that USP? The
USP is the expertise in knowing about renewables. When I was starting out in A Word About Wind as well, there was a lot of focus on the finance community.
Okay.
Because the company was founded 2011. I joined in 2014, and so this was a period in the offshore wind sector in the UK where there was a lot of big projects coming through, but people were still working out how you would put money into these to make them make financial sense and make a financial return on it. So by focusing on a bit more on the financial community initially, then it helped to give more of a focus to what we were writing that's different from other trade titles in the sector, and also gave a bit more of a focus to networking events we would run in London. So we would get developers and bankers and consultancies and all these sorts of people in the room. Yep. And there wasn't just a focus on offshore wind, but I think offshore wind was clearly a big part of it and was the open door we were pushing against at that time.
I'm interested to know Tamarindo's origin story for going into and pursuing renewables, and also yours. Do you have any personal convictions when it comes to the renewable energy space?
It's a combination, I think. Before I came to Word About Wind, I was writing for another website for about a year, but then for whatever reason that didn't work out. And and I kind of thought that, well, I've got a lot of the skills that are needed. Like I've got a background in writing about the development cycle for commercial properties. Yeah. So and a lot of that, whether it's sort of planning or financing or getting approvals for projects, is similar. Yes, there are differences, and clearly there are huge differences in what the end product is, because it's either electricity or it's huge office buildings to let out. But a lot of the process is the same. Wind farms have always attracted attention, positive and negative. And I think, probably my journalistic instinct thought, well, that's probably a good sector to be writing about, because, even if I do it for a short time, there will be interesting stories to write. But also, it does feel good to be able to write about stuff that makes a contribution to try to improve the world.
Yeah.
And talking about the Tamarindo principles, that's always been the ethos of focusing on this sector and wanting to kind of accelerate that transition as far as we can. Yeah. And even if it's just making kind of incremental steps or giving people ideas that helps them to unlock new business ideas or whatever it is, then that's still it's still better that work is happening than not.
Talk to me about Tamarindo's vision, mission, and values as a company.
At Tamarindo, our ethos is that we want to empower professionals in the renewable energy sector in a few main ways. So we have our media brands, which helps to equip them with the intelligence they need to make decisions. We have the live events, which gives them the opportunity to meet up with others in the sector and discuss what they see as the big challenges and build those connections to win business and to make the next leaps that are needed. And then there's the PR and the comms services, which is more focused on drawing out the way they're different and the way that they make contributions to the sector. and helping to raise their profiles as well. So, you know, so we're sort of aiming to help professionals in the renewables sector in a few different and overlapping but complementary ways.
As a journalist, where do you see the sector going moving forwards, particularly in the European offshore wind, as I know that's a speciality that you're particularly knowledgeable of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last year or two, there's been a lot of talk about inflation and the impact this has had on the economics of projects. I mean, for many years, there've been competitive auctions, and you know, the nature of that process being what it is they've squeezed the margins, the profit margins way down.
Right.
So that then when inflation has come along, then you know some of the projects then don't look as viable. So there's been a lot of talk from Ørsted and Vattenfall and other companies over the last year about the impact that this has been having. 2024 and ahead, you know, it's a chance for a reset. So no, there's a lot of offshore wind auctions happening in Europe this year. So we'll start to get an idea of how that's changing the assumptions that companies are making for their projects. And it's not just in Europe. I mean, it's relevant in the US as well, where New York has just re-tendered a couple of major offshore wind projects at sort of higher strike prices or higher subsidy levels that mean that they should be more viable. So I think, you know, this focus on the viability of projects is going to be the big focus for the next year or two, and rightly so. There's new markets potentially opening all the time. I mean, we've clearly had the sector growing in the North Sea, particularly off the coasts of kind of UK, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium. You know, there's some projects coming off France as well. But I think we're starting to see new markets opening up in Europe. So, you know, Poland, there's a lot of exciting projects or like exciting moves happening in projects there. There's Mediterranean as well. I think I've just written a piece about the Italian market and about how there's so many floating wind projects planned down there, and how that comes to be unlocked. And partly that's a technology story as well, because you know they're more reliant on floating wind foundations. Yeah. So you know this is where the industry is going in terms of commercializing that technology.
Richard, let's talk about how your role within Tamarindo has changed over the course of your time with them.
The first 6 years, they were mostly focused on the stuff that we've been talking about more so far.
Yep.
So the journalism side, the editorial brands, and you know, and that was pretty much 100% of my role until early 2020. Then in January of that year, my role pivoted. So I still spend about a third of my time working on the media brands, but then the other 2/3 are working with a handful of clients in the sector at any one time on their sort of content marketing type products. So that could be special reports or white papers or podcasts or blogs or whatever it is, whatever communications stuff that they need.
Practically day to day, I mean, how have your skill sets had to adapt to a different style of content, so to speak?
Some of the principles are the same. I mean, you're trying to write for an audience, you're trying to write something that's interesting.
Yeah.
The difference comes in that when you're working with clients, then they will have particular things that they want to say, or particular parts of their business that they're keen to promote. And it's about sort of finding where the kind of the interesting ideas are there. And for the most part, we work with really good companies who are open to taking that feedback and that expertise on what we think will resonate with the media and with their customers. Trying to take into account those sort of commercial needs as well is important.
You don't want to sugarcoat things. You want to pursue the best for them. How do you do that in instances where it's challenging, but you want to push for more for them?
You do what you can. I mean, like at the end of the day, we are advisors. So you know we're working to help them to produce the best content they can. But equally, we know that coming from a journalism background, then you know there may be times where you think, well, this would be a really interesting topic to go down editorially, but it doesn't work commercially.
Sure.
And you know, and I think that that is fine. I mean, it's it's part of the nature of the role, and I think there are still interesting ideas you can find within that.
The pandemic has been talked about a lot, and we're certainly rinsing the topic, but I feel like there's a good opportunity here to talk about the way information has been changed and the way it's been shared and disseminated. What are your observations from that?
My role changed to focus on content marketing at a very good time, because this was January 2020. Then in the March and April, the world went into lockdown. So suddenly people couldn't get out there to meet at conferences and to generate leads in the way that they always had. Yeah. So there was sort of a lot more of a need and probably budget for sort of putting money into products that would help them to do that remotely, whether it's reports or blogs or other things. So I mean that sort of worked well. I think in the immediate aftermath, you saw some huge changes. Clearly, everyone started having webinars and
right.
And virtual events, and that sort of lasted for a couple of years. But then I think probably in terms of what people are really interested in, a lot of it has reverted to what it was before. People still want to be out there going to live events. They still want to be meeting face to face. So there's the pandemic hasn't changed that
human nature.
It hadn't changed that sort of fundamental appetite.
Yeah.
I think where clearly one area it has changed massively is video calls.
Sure.
Before, sort of 4 or 5 years ago, I guess we'd have been primarily picking up the office phone or the mobile to try and get interviews, whereas now you were more likely to have a video call and be meeting someone face to face. And actually, I think that works really well in the renewable sector, because whatever country you're in, I think there are some universal issues with permitting or getting finance for your projects or whatever it is. So actually, I think video calls have made the world smaller in that respect, because you can start to build a face-to-face relationship with people in the US or wherever it is, even if you aren't going to be flying out to Los Angeles on a Friday. I don't think it's completely equal. I think video calls still have their place, and they're a great way to get half an hour in someone's schedule.
Yeah.
I think if you're having a big strategic meeting and you're trying to get a couple of whole teams together, and it's going to be a 3 or 4 hour or whole day event rather than an hour or 90 minutes,
sure,
then meeting face to face still works really well for that. And I think there's probably more opportunity when you meet in person to have some of the conversations about your life that you wouldn't necessarily have so much on a video call.
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely a balance. And I think for what I'm doing, if it's an initial call with someone to get their views or insights about the electric vehicle sector or whatever it is, then actually it's quite nice to be able to do that on a video call. And I think for a nice hangover from the pandemic, that maybe we're all a little bit more accepting of people's lifestyles outside work, and if you see them in the study or see them in their living room or whatever, and then actually I think that can help to open up conversations and probably foster some of that trust and goodwill as well, rather than just being over an impersonal phone call.
Where do you see your role progressing within Tamarindo or outside of Tamarindo? You're a skilled professional in your field. You've grown your skill set and your experience over a good period of time. What's next on your appetite?
The move that I've made from being a journalist to now doing a lot more predominantly content marketing, I think it's a shift that a lot of people make, but they don't necessarily make it within one company, because the media, the companies operating the media brands tend to be different from the PR and comms advisors. So actually, it's I think that the transition has worked well. So I don't tend to look more than a year ahead. Sure. So and I don't know if that's a luxury of not having had to or whatever, but the fact, Tamarindo is based in Oxford. I live about 10 minutes away, so I'm still taking my youngest daughter to primary school for the next couple of years. So maybe that starts to change or open up the opportunities after that. But I think that, just having this base of writing and research skills, I think there will always be a position for that. Even with the rise of stuff like there's a lot of talk about AI.
A particular hotspot for AI to grow has been in written content online, particularly through large language models like ChatGPT. What was your experience of the rise of ChatGPT, and obviously the somewhat plateau of it over time, but still growth in terms of its performance?
Started by going in and telling it to write poems about wind farms. It seemed everyone was doing that for a couple of months and putting them on LinkedIn. I think it's something where we'll keep an eye on what's happening. I'm seeing how I can integrate it into research process at the moment, but actually still for the most part, it's as quick for me to go online and do the research that I need. I think one area where it's already had a big impact and has for the last sort of 4 or 5 years is around transcribing of interviews.
Yeah.
I mean, I can get more writing done because I can go online and give my transcript to an online service which will generate a transcript with using AI and get it back with probably 85-90% accuracy, and and that's a huge difference because if I was doing a 1 hour interview, then before I had this, then the rule of thumb was always it takes 3.5 times as long to transcribe by hand yourself as the length of the initial interview.
Yeah.
So
similar process in video production. Is
that so if you do a big interview and then have to transcribe it, that can immediately take up half a day or more. Yeah. Whereas now you can get that done automatically in 10 minutes, and it frees up my brain for the higher value work, which is actually starting to take the thoughts in those interviews and piece them together into something interesting.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I don't think it's there to replace.
What advice do you have for other writers and journalists in ways that they can integrate large language models into their workflow effectively?
Maybe it would have been different if I was starting out and trying to put transcripts from some of these quite technical interviews in, because then I wouldn't know what they were trying to say. So
sure.
So actually for the first 5 or 6 years at Tamarindo and do my own transcripts, then actually being able to spend more time listening to the interview, work out what the people are saying, actually that kind of helps to build knowledge as well.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe you don't get that so much if you're just relying on another piece of technology.
What's some reflections on things that are important, or maybe some scars that you've got along the way from having to learn things the hard way that you could pass on?
I'm always a big advocate of sort of business writing and business journalism, and probably also business comms as well. I think that, yes, they're competitive sectors to get into and probably always will be. But, I think you can make more opportunity if you can get into a sector where maybe fewer people want to write about and want to be doing comms about, because
sure.
then you get to you probably get more time to learn and you can kind of get an understanding of the commercial fundamentals as well. Was writing about renewable energy my goal 20 years ago? Not really, but the fact I'm doing it now and have done it for a decade, and I enjoy writing about the sector and enjoy helping companies to share interesting insights, then I think I would see my future in the sector.
Are there any small maybe tactics that you could recommend when it comes to your writing and interviewing process to make things easier for people?
I'd never claim to have the best interview technique, but I think spending a bit of time beforehand to work out what information you're trying to get, like it does make a difference. I think instinctively there can be a reaction from journalists sometimes to think, well, why is the PR asking for me this list of questions beforehand? And and I understand that, because it can, sometimes you don't want to give that stuff away before. But equally, I think taking the time to think about what you want to get out of a call and sort of how it kind of fits in with what you're doing is helpful. I don't know. I've always come in feeling like I want to just make sure I respect the time of my interviewee. So I don't want to just keep them on a call for 45 minutes or an hour and just sort of rambling on. If I can get done what is needed in 25 minutes or half an hour, and then say, well, if I've got questions after, I will follow up. But then that's just my approach. I think probably other people are probably happier to kind of to build more of a cheerful rapport, which has probably never been as much of a strength of mine. Probably come in more seriously minded, but I think that probably reflects the people I've been comfortable working with through my career as well.
Quickfire Curiosity is what we'll wrap up with. It's a series of short trivia, a little bit philosophical, but mostly just personal. Would you consider yourself a futurist?
No, not really.
How would you define futurist?
I would define futurist as being someone who's very visionary and has an idea of what they think the world will be like in 15, 20 years time or longer. I've kind of always been more drawn to dealing with the world how it is, and if that means I can do things that help to make little differences, then that is valuable too.
Imagine you go back in time, you meet your younger self, maybe late teens, early 20s. You have 30 seconds to give them some life advice, both on career trajectory and just general philosophy on life, really. What do you say to him?
I would say that there is a place for you in the world. I think there are naturally areas that, probably for all of us, where we feel our strengths are, and areas we feel like we're not as strong. I mean, I feel like I've been lucky at Tamarindo and in my career so far that I've been able to lean into some of the areas where I'm stronger, like getting more in depth on particular topics and writing, I don't know, maybe longer content.
Yeah.
And and you don't need to worry so much about the other stuff. Sure. If you don't want to be a line manager or whatever, then there are plenty of other people who can do that and probably a lot better than I could.
Sure.
So yeah, I think just having that confidence that that there are opportunities out there, and some of the principles that you will learn pretty early on can help, like the importance of building trust, the knowledge of the market, and just keeping in mind that you're writing for an audience of people who may not necessarily be seeking out your article, but may still get some value out of it if they do.
Sure. Where can people find out more about Tamarindo?
You can come to our website, tamarindo.global, which is where we have all of our analysis and information about our events. We've also got the ubiquitous LinkedIn channels as well, where we share news and other insights.
Fantastic.
Or just find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation with Richard. If you want to watch more conversations with entrepreneurs, experts and professionals from across the world of renewable energy, you can click the link to my left or to my right. I'm not sure which one it is.